Okay, good afternoon to everybody. This is Benjamin Anthony. I'm the co-founder and Chief Executive Officer of the Miriam Institute, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar featuring Tzur Goldin. I want to thank Tzur so very much for being with us. Thank you, Tzur.
Thank you for hosting me.
Thank you very much. And before we get going, I just want to set a few things before everybody who's kindly giving of their time and their attention to this. So the first thing is I want to give a sincere vote of thanks to Rosita Panini, who's the Chief Operating Officer and co-founder of our organization, and also to my colleague Alan Langer for bringing this together as ever. And I also want to inject a little bit of a personal aspect to this, and then I'm going to come straight to you, Tzur. So in 2014, during the events that preceded Operation Protective Edge, Israel's defensive operation inside Gaza, I literally drove my youngest brother, Alexander, to his base that was adjacent to the Gaza Strip. He was drafted by way of the emergency mobilization of reservists at his unit in Shirion in the Armored Corps. A couple of days thereafter, my younger brother, Raphael, was also drafted. And a couple of days thereafter, I was drafted. And we all participated in that operation. I was sent not to the Gaza Strip, but to Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank. And at the end of that operation, my mother was given the wonderful news that all three of us had returned, had come back from the battlefield. And if to any of our viewers or listeners that sounds like a somewhat exceptional scenario, what I want all of them to understand is that over in the State of Israel, that renders me and my family and my siblings perfectly ordinary, perfectly average. It's the story of every son and daughter and mother and father and brother and sister within the State of Israel. What's not an average story is the story that you're going to share with us today. And that is the story whereby you, an officer in an elite unit within the Israel Defense Forces, alongside your fraternal twin brother Hadar, Zichrono Livracha, may his memory be a blessing, participated in that very same operation, Operation Protective Edge in 2014. You both operated militarily very close indeed to one another. And during the events of a UN-US brokered ceasefire, Hadar was killed, kidnapped. His body is still being held for ransom by Hamas terrorists within the Gaza Strip. Now, we're going to talk a lot about that, as much as you're willing to speak to us about it. But there are a couple of other things that I wanted to make very, very apparent to everyone. This story is particularly close to our organization because Rosita, the COO of our organization, is in-laws with a gentleman by the name of Mr. Edry, Mr. Yoram Edry. And Yoram Edry's brother, Sharon, Zichrono Livracha, of blessed memory, was a soldier also in an elite unit who was kidnapped, who was killed, who was hidden, whose body was ultimately found and discovered in two separate pieces, with his upper torso, his arm clenched in a fist, still holding his kippah. And as a result of that kidnapping that took place, now today, for anyone who's watching this, you should be aware that by law, travel on public transportation for Israeli soldiers is free of charge, so that never must they take a lift from a hitchhiker or anybody who might seem to be an innocent passerby. And so this very much moves our hearts. I know it's very close to Rosita's heart, and I just want to take a moment to extend our repeated condolences to the entire Edry family, to Yoram, to Azita, to Merit, and also to his family in Israel. So this is deeply personal to us. In order for us to take the listeners through your story with Hadar, I first want them to understand the exceptional caliber of the person you are and where you come from. And contrary to what I do in most interviews, I've actually kept a notepad and a pen here. And I'm going to try and learn as we go through this from you, Tzur, with your permission. So if I look away intermittently, it's for that purpose. And also if I look away, it might be because I get jolted by emotion here and there. But I want you to tell our listeners about your father first and about your mother, because it goes to the story of who you are and also to the story of who Hadar is and was. So tell us about your father, Simcha, who we've had the pleasure of meeting.
Okay, so I think it's most fitting to start with that. We're in just after finishing Holocaust Remembrance Day, Yom HaShoah VaGvura here in Israel. And I think the definition or the best way to frame the personnel that are my parents is the Holocaust, actually. They are descendants of Holocaust survivors. And by many means, this I think was what made them who they are. They were born and raised in a family of Holocaust survivors in a very famous neighborhood called Kiryat Eliezer in Haifa. And they were brought up in the quest to rebuild the Jewish nation in Israel, in the Israeli country. And I think today, when my brother was kidnapped, I was 23. Today I'm 29 years old. And I think now when I look back, I can say throughout all my life, and especially those very difficult years that I've been through, that this is the best way to frame who my parents are. They are just the second generation of Holocaust survivors with the quest to rebuild the Israeli nation in the best way we can, and the feeling of responsibility. My father, Professor Tzur Goldin, is an historian. He's a medievalist. He works he's responsible head of the Diaspora Research Center in Tel Aviv University. I think one of his best goals and mission in life is to try and look back and put all the research about all the diaspora, all the communities all around the world who were eliminated before, who were eliminated. And one of his best and biggest projects now that he's responsible now actually concerned the Jewish soldier in the Second World War. 1,500,000 Jewish soldiers were part of this war, and he's building a big museum. One of his projects is to bring, just like every single student in school in Israel goes to, we call it Masa LePolin, something that is mandatory for every Israeli high school student to go to Poland and go to see all the Holocaust. And he's building another part of this journey that concerns, he calls it Chana Senesh journey, where he follows the heroic deeds of Chana Senesh in many, many places around Europe. This is what he does. My father was a Magad. He was a lieutenant colonel in the IDF in reserves. He served many, many years. My mother is a computer scientist. She worked for about 35 years in the defense industry, working all those Iron Dome and rockets that you see all over. I'm proud to say every place I go that I'm a son of a historian and a rocket engineer. So I'm very proud of that. Actually, my mother doesn't do reserves, but she's the toughest person to do the most, I think, brilliant things for the defense of Israel. We are 4 children. I have my twin brother Hadar. We are the youngest of 4 brothers and sisters. I have an older sister who is head co-manager of the Hashomer Hadas and JNF organization that is responsible for all the agricultural and the Zionist identity in Israel. And also a lot of people from all around the world come and do a very, very special thing here in Israel in midst of Hashomer Hadas. And I have another older brother called Menachem Goldin, Henry Goldin, who is head of a very special institute that is responsible for families with children with disabilities. I hope I'm phrasing
you are
it well. we're all officers in the IDF. We all served in the IDF, and of course, Hadar and me, we are the youngest. And I served in Maglan as an officer, and also Hadar. Maglan is a special unit in Tzarchanim, and Hadar in the circumference of Givati Brigade in a special desert forces. And as officers.
Can you just repeat, because the reception went down a bit, can you just repeat where Hadar served, please?
Well, Hadar served after going to a pre-military yeshiva academy. We both went to a pre-yeshiva military academy. We spent, and then we went into service the very same week. We registered. Hadar served in the Sayeret Givati. It's a special elite unit in the Commando Desert Forces of the IDF, and they were actually they were אני לא יודע איך להגיד מומחים. They were
experts. They were experts.
Experts in everything that concerned the southern part, the southern borders in Israel, part of which is the Gaza Strip, and they were the tip of the spear, the people who events and Operation Protective Edge, the war in Gaza in 2014. During this war, I also went into Gaza most of the time, about 500 meters, very, very close to Hadar, in a different unit doing another mission. The most important mission that we were responsible of was actually destroying the terror tunnels that were dug from within in Gaza, kilometers into Israel, that were dedicated to launch terror attacks into civilian concentration in the southern part of Israel. We spent 3 intense weeks in Gaza, and during these weeks there were very, very close combat encounters. And Hadar's unit is one. They were marked as, they got the very highest mark for all their activities during this operation. My mission, actually, in a different part, not too far away, was I was responsible of a company that did a lot of things, but 2 things that I can remark is rescue. We had 2 rescue platoons who were responsible to rescue wounded soldiers, sometimes soldiers who were killed. I was a part of an encounter where there was a kidnapped attempt against an engineer soldier who was Hamas terrorists tried to kidnap. And this only happened for 1 week before the incident that we are about to describe about my brother. So 2 missions. One mission that I actually received was to take responsibility over 30 Palestinian Gaza civilians who were caught in the middle of conduct, who were used as human shields right after all the warnings came from the IDF, after we went in very surgically not to damage or injure any one of them. I took 30 of them into refuge in the middle of the field of combat, and they were grateful for that. This is one of the missions that we've done in the IDF. That's what we do. It's very clear to me. It's very clear to us. And I think it also can give a very good demonstration of the depravity of Hamas, who's in contrast to the way we look at life and how they look at death, and how they treat their own civilians, and of course attacking ours. Hadar, as we mentioned, was responsible in a different mission. In the morning of Friday morning, the 1st of August 2014, was the last day, as Benjamin had mentioned, during what was meant to be the final ceasefire brokered by the UN and the US. It was the Obama administration, Secretary Kerry, and under this humanitarian ceasefire. They exploited the fact that we were under very strict restrictions not to use firearms. And this was when, in that morning, Hadar and two other soldiers named Benaya Sarel, the commander of this elite force of the Commander Desert Forces, and Iliel Gidoni, another excellent soldiers of Zichronam Livracha, of blessed memory. And they were drawn into a cowardly ambush during that ceasefire, where 13 terrorists attacked them. There's also a very, very, I think, unbelievable story of bravery, where they were all damaged straight away when the attack had occurred during that ambush, and they still held fighting. There were two attempts to kidnap also Liel Gidoni, third soldiers, and Hadar, and they managed to kill some of the terrorists. And by the end of this incident, Hadar, just before the IDF forces of Givati were able to under opening and come and rescue them, Hadar was shot and then dragged into a terror tunnel, from which he never emerged up till now. It was confirmed by the Israeli intelligence and by Hamas intelligence, and by אני לא זוכר, how do you say, and how they חקרו את הזירה.
They investigated the areas.
They investigated the area. That Hadar was in fact shot, and it's over 90%, and very, very probable that he was killed. And he is still, as we said, held hostage, him, a fallen soldier, and Doron Shaul, another fallen soldier from Operation Protective Edge, in addition to two live civilians, Israeli civilians, one of them with a very severe mental case, which is family, Jewish, Ethiopian, Israeli, very, very proud Zionist, very, very proud family, went into this tragedy. They got no information about this civilian. And of course, we didn't receive any, apart from the fact that we know that, in fact, he is held by Hamas for the past almost 6 years.
So you've given us an overview there, Tzur, and you've gone through it with tremendous composure and so on and so forth. I want to really reiterate a couple of points and then ask some questions of you. First of all, when we interview you, we're interviewing really the very best of what Israel is. An academic family, a family dedicated to Israel, a family dedicated to Zionist causes, multiple officers within the same family, not just officers, but you're somewhat humble, but you an officer in what I would say is one of the top 3-4 elite units in the Israel Defense Forces. Hadar, your dear brother, the very same, in a top-ranked elite unit within the Israel Defense Forces. All of this undertaken voluntarily, and you are operating simultaneously, as you said earlier in the call, with a separation of not more than about 500 meters between you and Hadar in the same battlefield against the digging of terror tunnels that were constructed specifically for what came about in the context of Hadar. Now, these terror tunnels, obviously, as the name suggests, are subterranean, but they were specifically designed to move into the state of Israel and also within Gaza, to build a network of tunnels within Gaza in the case of a ground operation launched by the Israel Defense Forces, with the goal of killing Israeli citizens if they moved through the terror tunnels, Hamas terrorists, into Israel's territory, and with the goal of murdering citizens, kidnapping citizens, killing citizens, maiming citizens, and also kidnapping soldiers of the Israel Defense Forces, specifically in order to hold the state of Israel to ransom. Now, that is a very, very important point, because we have had situations where soldiers were kidnapped in the past. And the attitude of your family to the kidnapping of your brother, Hadar, is very, very different to what I think most people consider when they talk about and hear about you demanding the return of Hadar. So I want to counter that attitude soon, not yet, but I do want to ask you a couple of things. What was your immediate thought when you were informed that it was your twin brother Hadar who had been kidnapped? What was your reaction at that time?
Well, the situation was that I was part of the rescue effort to bring Hadar back as part of my mission as a rescue force. I got the route into where Hadar was been kidnapped. I didn't know it was in fact Hadar, but we've done this so before. And during that, I don't want to talk a lot and spare our time, but I want to spare our time a little bit. But the situation was that I was actually there was a drill to draw me out. I was responsible to bring a very special device that I was an expert in, that was dedicated to help investigate a tunnel in case of a kidnap. I went back to the Israeli border. I was drawn even further, unaware for the reason, but the reason was actually for me to be taken out. There were a couple of companies and units that were responsible for that. That Ramatkal Benny Gantz was responsible for that effort to come, and it was about a kilometer, not too far away, where an officer ranked much higher than I was told me that Hadar had been kidnapped. I was in the middle of everything. I was combating for over a month, responsible for a lot of soldiers, and I remember that it was very hard for me to understand that this person Hadar can actually be gone. I felt when they told me, the impression was that he was still alive, and this is how we worked. The IDF still made efforts almost 48 hours after the kidnap to retrieve Hadar. I remember that I felt like all my strength has been taken back from me outside, and in about a few seconds it will all came back with the willingness to effect as much as I can to bring him home. Thoughts about I had a lot of thoughts about where he is, how he's struggling, and you can imagine what can go through your head. But because Hadar was such a brilliant person, such a responsible person, first and foremost had great responsibility for all others. He wasn't a person who was streaming into battle. On the contrary, he was a person that was aiming to save all the people who were around him and take responsibility for them. So I thought about actually two things. I thought about my mother, who has two of her youngest children that are in this conflict, apparently receiving also the horrible message of Hadar being kidnapped. And I thought about Edna. Edna is was the fiance of Hadar. About 3 weeks before they were engaged, and were about to be married about a month and a half after I received the message. And I thought about my mother and Edna. I couldn't believe that one part of me, Hadar, is still away, and it was very hard. It was very hard because also, as a family with great respect to humanitarian values and to the moral quest of the Israeli nation, and our quest, moral quest, to give an example of everything, it was very. And after experiencing, like every family in Israel, the way that the kidnapping terrorism of Hamas is actually a success for the terrorist organizations, and how they exploit, how they set the rules for us, how they set an equation where they kidnap a civilian or a soldier, and actually use them as a political tool to release thousands and thousands of terrorists. At that point, I was also, I knew that, I was aware of the fact that we are entering, my family, my very, very anonymous family is also entering a position where we are at a very, very difficult situation of kidnapping. And it was very, very hard for me. But I think the first thing that came into my mind is a concern for my mother, Etna, the fiance of Hadar, and the concern of how we can affect this incident as fast as we can.
Now, what was the reaction of your mother and of your father when the news was broken to them? Were you there when the news was broken to them? I should add that a relative of yours is the then Minister of Defense, Moshe Bogi Ya'alon, and I believe that he traveled specifically. I've heard him and I've spoken to him. He's explained that when he received the news of Hadar being kidnapped, he put in a request and a stipulation that it not be announced that there was any association, because that would up the ante, if you like. That would increase the leverage that Hamas would cynically seek to draw from this kidnapping. But he did travel to your parents. Now, who broke the news of this happening to your parents, and what was the reaction of your dear parents, if you can tell us?
Okay, so we received the information that Hadar was kidnapped at the Friday noon, was the 1st of August, just a bit less than 48 hours after that. We received the message by Bogi Ya'alon, Moshe Bogi Ya'alon, who is a close relative, and Orna Barbivai was the chief Alufat Aka, and the chief rabbi of.
She was Tzur, are you still there?
Sorry.
Take a moment.
The call. Can you all hear me properly?
Yeah, we can hear you and we can see.
Everybody hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Can you hear me still?
Oh, yeah, I can.
I just want to explain, Orna Barbivai was a female officer in the Israel Defense Forces and the head of manpower for the IDF, and she also traveled to your parents along with Moshe Bogi Ya'alon and who else?
Okay, so they arrived into my family's house, and they informed us that most chances that Hadar has been killed. It was the very, very last hours of Operation Protective Veg. Hundreds and hundreds of soldiers were there inside Gaza in effort, risking the broke it. Very, very clear to us that Hadar is still inside. His body has been kidnapped. It was informed both halachic from the Jewish religion and tradition that he can be confirmed dead, and IDF intelligence. And so we were recommended to, just like you said, in order to prevent a situation where Hamas is talking about live soldiers that they hold, and trying to bring the price as high as possible in order to release thousands of murderers from Israeli jails. So we were recommended to make a symbolic act of some kind of funeral, which was very famous in Operation Protective Edge and during that war, where we stood, and also in that ceremony we told proud that we won't be intimidated by Hamas, and that this is a humanitarian cause, a humanitarian obligation, both by Islam and both by every single group or moral value, to bring the fallen soldiers home. So this was the incident. Bogi, who was the Minister of Defense, arrived. We all entered into a room, and it was, I think, a very, very unique conversation. We weren't, in fact, talking about our loved one who has been killed, but also about we were actually talked about Am Israel and about the lives of the soldiers still in Gaza and how we can affect their safe return home to the families. And that's what we've done. We didn't think twice. This was the incident.
So that happened, I'm reminding everybody, in 2014. We're now in 2020. And your mother, there's something that I heard when I and Rosita had the privilege of visiting with you, is that you're an officer, Hadar, of course, was an officer, your sister was an officer, your brother was an officer, your father was an officer, your mother was not an officer, but she is the chief of staff of your dear family. She really runs the show and keeps things going, and is a very, very strong personality. And as any mother would, she has been deeply, singularly involved in this effort since then. What sort of things has your family undertaken in order to bring back the body of Hadar Goldin, Zichrono Livracha, and what is some of the opposition that you have faced in your efforts? Because I will tell you, a lot of people hear about efforts to bring a soldier back and they immediately think about concessions or prisoner releases or other such things. You are very different in your view. I want you to express that, and then if you could answer my earlier questions as well.
I'll try. Okay, so for just over 30 years, Israel has been struggling. Not all Israel, I think most of the leading Western countries have been struggling with the kidnapping terrorism. This is a very special and unique terrorism aimed at not only individuals, but against families, with a very, very clear target to break our spirits, to break, especially in Israel, to break the bonding between families and what holds the Israeli society together. For 30 years, Israel has been struggling. Terror organizations have been succeeding, and especially Hamas has been succeeding to set an equation, set rules where they are kidnapping civilians and soldiers. This is an asset for them, and in exchange, they can release terrorists with blood. We call it with the blood on their hands. Murderers from Israeli jails back to terrorist activity, and for 30 years, Israel has been working according to this kind of rules. The very last one and famous is the Shalit. We call it the Shalit deal. It's not fair against the family. It's not the family's deal. It was Benjamin Netanyahu and the government who was responsible for this. But on 2011, thousands of terrorists have been released, and I think we were all happy. I think bringing soldiers from the battlefield is the most highest, very essential virtue for us. But I think this marked a very big sense of loss, a very big sense of victory for terrorism. And what we said as we came, we dug ourselves into this period because we found the Israeli government actually paralyzed. We found the Israeli Foreign Office paralyzed. We found the Israeli Defense Office paralyzed against this kind of terrorism, where and terrorist organization actually forces you to choose out of two very, very bad situations. One of them is to break your most highest value of bringing a soldier that were left behind, or in exchange, and bringing thousands of terrorists back, or on the other hand, abandoning them or causing a release of thousands of soldiers. And as we dug ourselves in, as we assembled, I think the greatest experts that Israel have, we got to the conclusion that this is not a sense of fate. Actually, this is an equation that was set for us from terrorist organization. In Gaza, there are 2 million civilians that are held hostage by 30,000, and we call it the regional bullies, with very, very a lot of interests and very, very low power, and a lot of things that can be done, and the language should be sent to them. Instead of kidnapping soldiers being an asset for a terrorist organization. We believe that this should be a burden, and the entity that pays the price is not Israeli civilians, but a terrorist organization. This is an exercise that has been done all around the world. The latest one is actually President Trump dealing with Israeli fallen, with the American fallen soldiers in South Korea. There is no reason why a dictatorship, a terrorist entity, would set the rules for us by kidnapping, and it is time that we push them. We have all the means to do so. We have all the means to do it in the most highest moral way. If we will have time to elaborate about that. In the past 6 years, we're talking about my mother. She's the chief of staff, but she's also, I think, one of Israel's. There weren't a lot foreign ministers, but you can say that she's informally one of the biggest, together with Professor Irvin Kotler. They are the main vector working on this situation, and a lot of stuff that we have achieved. One of them is very, very important, of the UN resolution of it's resolution number 2474. That was a resolution that took place in the UN Security Council that is conditioning every permanent humanitarian arrangement after conflict, conditioning it by retrieving all the fallen soldiers from that conflict. Secretary of the UN has enforced that, and actually not the EU, not the UN, no Western entity is working on brokering or amending a permanent resolution for Gaza before bringing Hadar, Oron, and the 2 civilians back home. This is only one small thing that my mother was responsible, and this is the vector. This is where we're going. We are one of the most humanitarian, with high moral obligations, country and military in the whole world, and there's no reason why Hamas, as a terrorist organization, should receive salaries from the entire international communities, or a lot of upgrades. We're not talking about conditioning food or medicine or any basic humanitarian support for Gaza, because this is important, but there's no reason why there will be many upgrades for this terrorist entity while they are holding Hadar in Gaza in the most barbaric way. And we all think and we hope that this is also will be the approach of the Israeli government. This is already the approach of the American administration. This was also partially the approach of the previous American Obama administration, and also now with the Trump administration. And we hope that Israel would also adopt this fully. And this approach, where a terrorist organization kidnapping a soldier will find it not worthwhile, where the civilians, the Palestinian civilians that are held hostage by this organization, will understand that because of this organization, the upgrades aren't being into progress. This will be a thing that not only will save my family, will not only bring Hadar home, but will make a shift for all of this equation and save lives in the future, save hundreds of families, lives of families, hundreds of soldiers, by absolutely eliminating the method of kidnapping soldier, where in the next Yom HaZikaron, or Soldier Remembrance Day, families will be able to grieve on their loved ones, and there will not be an incident like ours occurring, where there are still soldiers fallen soldiers and live soldiers were held, live civilians were held captive.
You know, it's so important that you've expressed that, because in a nutshell, you have said that Hamas has come to you and they have said, because we have the body of Hadar, you can either release possibly thousands of terrorists or never retrieve his body. And you reject that choice. You reject that choice and you say, no, we are going to use your own depravity as a bludgeon against you. As a terrorist organization, you as a terrorist organization will be brought to your knees. Not the people of Gaza, not the innocent civilians of Gaza, but this terrorist organization. You are going to be made to learn and realize and recognize that it is not worth you holding on to these remains, to the body of Hadar Goldin, because you will be the ones who will suffer as a consequence of it. And I think that that message needs to be conveyed not only to the international community, but also to the Israeli domestic population who are still scarred by some of the earlier exchanges. And I just want our listeners to know that the substance and the essence and the teachings and the ethics that go into you and your parents and the strength that you're able to summon and to master to put that forward is really a consequence of you not only having personal strength, but also a deep, deep attachment to the history and responsibility in the future of the Jewish state, the Jewish people, and the Jewish faith. I don't think that absent those things, we would necessarily find those, but these are the things by which you are informed and by which you are propelled forward. So your mother had great success in getting this resolution, past resolution 2474, which I would ask everybody to review. In fact, after this call, we'll circulate the text of that resolution to the people who've dialed in. But there's more. You see, you've spoken to us about the personal aspects, but I want to come back to the international aspects. This was brokered by the UN and the US, this ceasefire. How do you hold those two entities in terms of their responsibility to work with you, and how well are they working with you?
Well, we're talking about a very long journey. We're on our 6 years. During this, we have very close relations to the American administration, who actually enforced it, not fully, but should enforce it a lot. When we're talking about the latest deal of the century, which if you can look into, also involves a high road tunnel into Gaza and a lot of things that concern that. We also put that into place when this arrangement comes into place. The very first step in order for that to happen will be in bringing back, doing as a measure of confidence, bringing back the soldiers. What we've done is reaching out to the American administration, reaching out to the UN secretary, and to the EU, of course. We also reached the Qataris and the Arab countries from around Israel to set an example, and this can be possible. I don't know what you read on the media, what is said and told about the media, about how the international community or the media, I don't know how it's there in America, is biased to Israel. This is not true if we have the yozma. I hope if you can, if we take
initiative.
If you take an initiative, there are two values that are very, very clear, especially in the UN. And there's zero tolerance to exploiting humanitarian aids, and there's zero tolerance against terrorism. And the most highest value that is also adopted by a lot of Arab entities from Arab nations that are also nations that are normally biased against Israel. They adopt that. They adopt the fact that bringing humanitarian solutions are things that are very, very sacred to all religions, especially Islam, not only Judaism or Christianity, but also we had Benjamin and Rosita, the founders of this organization, also took part in in helping getting close contact to the evangelical community in the US, all around the world. People adopt this approach. They understand there's a success at the end of this way, and that's what we've been doing for about 6 years. If we're talking about Remembrance Day, we're talking about our national days. One person that we took example from was Avital Sharansky. She is the Ishto of Natan Sharansky, which we all know. She went through a journey of 9 years against all forces stronger than her, reaching out through all the international community with one vector. There are millions of Jews in the USSR who are being held against their will. There's a huge wall that should be broken apart, and she was one of the vectors that helped to break that very solid wall, from which after in the 90s allowed over 1.5 million of Jews from the USSR to come to Israel, to find their home, to find refuge. And we believe that strongly. Sometimes there are people like Rosita and Benjamin who are also who are believers, who understand that you can take a realistic look at life, even though things are not always ideal and don't seem ideal, or the personnel, the people who are in charge in the international organizations. But if you keep repeating what you think is right, and you keep repeating what you understand can be put into practice, and this is something that can be put, that you can win. Also terrorism, also a kind of terrorism that has been winning and succeeding for over 30 years, not only in Israel, but around the whole international community.
So I want to ask you just 2 last questions, Saul, because I know that you have to get on to your next appointment, and thank you for your time. Before I do, I want you to know, I have this document here in front of me, and you can see the circled area. This document is the Trump Peace Initiative. It doesn't leave my desk. I've said it, I've annotated the back as well. You can probably see all of that, but I want to read to people what it is that it says here. It's on the section 15, and it's about prisoners, and it says, quote, "No Palestinian prisoners or administrative detainees will be released in accordance with this section if all Israeli captives and remains are not returned to the state of Israel." Now that must be an invocation of your sentiments as they've been put to this administration. Is that correct?
It's correct. We also have an overall approach. This is a system of measures that should be taken, and there shouldn't be. We shouldn't be talking in this language about prisoners. It's not fallen soldiers who should be rightfully brought back and not used as political tools.
Correct.
This doesn't come in exchange to prisoners in any way. The measure of confidence, if you are serious in bringing a solid, true solution for the humanitarian case of Gaza, you should see to that a measure has been taken, a measure of confidence, that you are serious about that. And if you have humanitarian targets, this is the first thing that you should be doing as a first step. We have been working very hard on that, and we are still working. This agreement hasn't been put into practice, these first levels. We've been working very hard with the team in the American administration, and to get led by, of course, my mother, but also by Professor Erwin Kotler, and the help of many Jewish organization and evangelical organization, a lot of organizations that put the cause of putting victory against terrorism. This is not fate. This is not something that should succeed over and over again. And I think this is a victory of our spirit, of the liberal, community, of the Western community. And it's a request, it's a message that should be conveyed very clearly.
So my last two questions. So number one, I would like to know what your relationship is now with the Trump administration. Do you find them a help? Do you find them reachable? Are they contactable to you? I know that your family is consistently being tormented by Hamas. There are constant attempts to torment your family. I'd just like you to explain a little bit about that very briefly, because I have one final question. The torments of Hamas and also the help and aid of the Trump administration, and then I'll come to my last question, if I may.
Okay, so okay, I'll answer very briefly. This actually also started before the Trump administration. I don't think it's something that should be. It's something that is true for all political entities. But the Trump administration has been, with the help of Jason Greenblatt, with the help of the Secretary of State, Pompeo, and also the latest arrival of President Trump. It's still very, very hard. There's still a conception that terrorist organization can't be negotiated. We both know when we're talking about negotiation, you don't only negotiate in words. So there are a lot of things that can be done in order to set the rules for them. It's very simple. If we are the people in charge, we should set the rules. Actually, the current administration in the U.S. understands that fully, that we should be the ones to set the rules, not only in around the world, but specifically surgically in Israel, and that this is possible. And Nikki Haley has also took part in phrasing a lot of the things we've done in the UN after she finished her task as an ambassador. I think this is a language that the U.S. administration wants to adopt. They haven't adopted fully. And one example is the deal of the century, where there is a very positive progress. The second thing is the intimidation of Hamas. Hamas intimidates us in all means, through the media, through movies and demonstrations that claim that Hadar is alive and the soldiers are being tormented. And there are also a lot of things. I'll say it very briefly. In Friday, 2 weeks ago, we made a very positive demonstration that we do for the past 112 last weeks. Over just a year and a half, we've done every single Friday demonstrating in front of Gaza in a place, Kfar Aza, where we met not too long ago, right against where Hamas has demonstration about 400 meters away. We're in front of them. We're demonstrating that we are a nation that calls for humanitarian success. And one example for the intimidation from Hamas is we held a Zoom, a video because of the the COVID-19 crisis. We held a demonstration, a digital one, and one of the digital platforms. 300 families took part in that demonstration, and Hamas hackers took on the broadcast station, hacked into a lot of devices, and intimidated us with anti-Semitic messages, with Nazi images, with pornography, with death to Jews, that Israel will lose. After that, we took about 20 children and 15 elderly people into treatment because of anxieties. And it was, I don't know how to express the feeling, but it was one of the toughest. We were attacked. And this is only one example of what they do. So this is what we are being through. And I think what holds us together is the sense that our way is true, our humanitarian cause is true, and the sense of Kol Israel Chaverim, the very oldest saying that we have a shared fate as a nation. This is what makes us the strongest and not the weakest. And that's what we're conveying to our children and to our friends all around the world.
I want to finish with one last question, Tzur, and you're going to have to give it much less time than it demands. But when I was in your home with your parents there, you showed me the room in which you and Hadar used to sleep as children, and even as young adults, and it was in an L-shaped formation, if I remember correctly. One bed was one way and the other was in an L-shaped formation next to it. And your parents actually constructed an extra room for one of you to go into, right?
Yeah.
That one of you was to go into that and create a bit of space for the two of you. And I want people to understand that option was rejected. Both you and Hadar rejected that option. You stayed sleeping in that same room. So just to finish this off for us, I know it's an international issue. I know you're working with the UN, the US, but this is a dynamic into which you never would have wanted to be thrust and which you would want to be released of right away. Who is your brother Hadar when you think of him? Just in the simple human form. And I know you don't have enough time to describe that fully, but tell us about that young man.
Hadar is a brilliant young man. He was an inspiration, first and foremost as an educator, also a commander. He was a brilliant artist. He made cartoons. I think he was a source of happiness. I think you can phrase it. You can't frame Hadar, and the love of my life, and I miss him dearly. There's no day that goes by without a sense of gaguim. I think is the most perfect way. Longing for him. But we try to live through his eyes and heart, and the way he lived, and that was life, and cherishing life, and bringing happiness. And that's what we're true. My father's name is Simcha. My mother's name is Chedva. We were once a source for happiness and positive, and that is also what I wish for my parents next Monday, Remembrance Day, and the whole families in Israel who are commemorating our Remembrance Day. To not only see how these people have fallen and the great loss, which is very, very important, but try to think of how they lived and how do we carry this on.
Well, Tzur, I want to thank you so very much, and I want you to know on behalf of our organization, while other people are equivocating, we actually support you, and we wish to see the terrorist organization Hamas destroyed, absolutely dismantled, their memories crushed into the dust of the earth, so that others who are innocent can cease being held hostage by them. We want to see the safe return of Hadar Goldin, Zichrono Livracha, and all of the detained soldiers and citizens of the state of Israel. And we know that your family, the embodiment, when Hadar went into his service in the IDF, he stitched onto his belt a phrase in Ivrit, and that phrase was Oz va'anava, courage and humility. And it's with that same courage and humility that he sought to act out his military career that we now see you and your dear family and all that you do. And we are with you. There are many here who are with you. If anybody reaches out to us and wants to know how to contact you, we will be sure to pass that along. Thank you so very much for being with us. And we are going on towards a moral victory for all of the people of Israel, and indeed the entire civilized world. Thank you so very much for everything. Tzur Goldin, an active reservist in the Israel Defense Forces. You are still in the fight. Thank you very much indeed for being with us.
Toda rabba.
Thank you
you very much.
Bye-bye.